Welcome to Solutions TV, a place of revealing and healing, reflection and connection, not against anything or anyone, but specifically for the building of your open mind. I'm Tamara Westwood, your host, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Lucy Wyatt. She's the author of Approaching Chaos. Now, don't let the title scare you. It's all about solutions. Lucy has found that we need to look back into our ancient past to discover the healing remedy for what ails our society today. You see, back in ancient Khemet, they understood how to live in ma'at, with nature, and that's what we're missing today. Listen to this great interview and discover how your mind will open wide.
All right. I'm so glad you could join us today here. We have Lucy Wyatt. She's joining us for an inspiring discussion about an ancient model for balanced civilization. And note, the title seems ominous. I'm speaking of, are we approaching chaos? But the beautiful thing about this is that we are going to be inspired by what Lucy has discovered in her wonderful research. Her thoughtful research has outlined a beautiful outcome if we just take heed of some old, ancient technology. Was it an elite, shamanic, megalithic city builder? Was it a group of people who knew something that we don't know today, who were able to actually live in harmony with nature? Well, we're going to get the answers to that question and much, much more with Lucy. Lucy Wyatt, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Tamara. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it is. And if our listeners knew what it took to get to this.
Oh, let's hope not. Yeah.
But tenacity really pays off.
I admire your tenacity.
Well, let's jump right into it. And, the book that we're speaking of is Approaching Chaos. And it's a beautiful book. I mean, not just the cover of it, but your insight that you've discovered.
Thank you.
We all know that we are living in a time of decline. We can see it just crumbling all around us.
Yeah.
And there are some problems, with the civilization that we're living in.
Yeah, yeah.
But in your book, you have some solutions.
Indeed. Yes, I mean, I wrote the book because I felt that we could learn so much from the past. We were very arrogant. We tend to think that we are the result of thousands of years of progress, but I don't think that's the case. I think we need to be humble and look at the past in a different way and think about it as something which can teach us so much. There were some very special people back in times gone by, and we didn't necessarily listen at the time, and now we should, perhaps.
Certainly. And we can all look around and recognize, maybe some of us have forgotten history, but we are still basically living in the Roman Empire, are we not?
Indeed, exactly. And in a way of thinking, it's a mentality that we're stuck in. And this mentality is about a philosophy where the end justifies the means. So that, which is a very militaristic way of looking at things, where you have an objective, and whatever it takes to achieve that objective, you will do it. And that's what causes so much destruction and disharmony and disharmonious living. Whereas they understood that everything is interconnected, and that's really the fundamental difference between us and them. They had a holistic way of looking at things.
Certainly. And as we can look back in the past, that we know the Greeks and the Romans certainly garnered much of their technology, much of the arts and all from ancient Egypt, or Khemet, as we can call it. And the problem is that they didn't get the whole story.
Well, it's probably just as well that they didn't get the whole story. Because if they had got the whole story, things might have gone even worse than they actually did, because they never actually got to the truth of how to manipulate the big stones, for example. That is a secret that has stayed pretty much secret. It's very hard to work out. I mean, engineers today have established that there are cranes in this world now that cannot lift those big stones. We do not have the technology to move the stones that they could do. So that in itself is a very significant difference between us.
Well, Lucy, if you'd go back to what created this interest in this very powerful subject. There's a lot of people who believe that the Greeks and the Romans are the ones that had it all, but obviously that's not the case. What led you to research back into ancient Egypt, Khemet?
Well, I was initially only really interested particularly in the Greeks, because they are the foundation of our own education system, and so much of what we know today we credit the Greeks with teaching us, mathematics, philosophy, whatever it is, geometry, all these things. And I had a particular interest at the time in alternative medicine, in homeopathy. And I was very keen to go back to some original papers and manuscripts and ideas about that. But the more I dug around, the more I realized that actually the Greeks aren't the start of it all. They are just merely the communicators of some of it. I had very little knowledge of ancient Egypt at the time, and it was just too exotic. It was too mysterious. And then in the end, I just read more and more and just got further and deeper and realized that there was a bigger picture to tell. I was originally just going to look at the origins of homeopathy, but in the end, it turned into a story about civilization itself. So that's what got me going.
Now, civilization. We can ask the question, well, which came first? Was it farming that led to civilization? You have a different view.
Yeah. I mean, we have told ourselves the story that it's a farming experiment that begins civilization. Anybody you talk to, they'll say, well, of course, they started sowing these seeds and producing these crops, and they had a surplus, and then they had marketplaces, and of course that then led to towns growing up, and then cities grew from that. That's not what I've discovered in the archaeological record. There were some early settlements in particular places like Çatalhöyük in southern Turkey, which date to about 6000 BC, but they did not grow into towns or cities, those places. And the first cities, that we call them cities, are identifiable because they are pre-planned. They are laid out in a structured way. They are not random marketplaces that have grown organically. And it's also recorded in the archaeological excavations that the first people who begin these places are priests. They create a kind of shrine, a ritual, place of ritual. That is the foundation of the city. And that to me is really significant. It's not the farmers who start the cities, it's the priests. And that's something which has not really been much discussed.
Certainly we know that in the ancient world that life revolved around spirituality.
Indeed. But this is taking spirituality to a different level, because we're moving away from the old hunter-gatherer shamanic ritual stuff. We're moving into a more sophisticated approach to spirituality. Yes, they are still doing a shamanic kind of ritual. That's certainly true. I found enough parallels between them and what goes on in the Amazon jungle or out in Mongolia or whatever. But it's more sophisticated, and the outcome is the building of cities. And there are these extraordinary parallels that exist visually between Central and Southern America, Mesoamerica, and Egypt and Mesopotamia and all these other places where cities appear. So it's very obviously all responds to a blueprint, to an archetype. And that is really what my research is all about.
So there was a plan that was set in action. And it's interesting that you mentioned Mesoamerica, of course, Egypt, you look at what's happening in Mongolia, you look all over the world. You find these civilizations popping up.
Yeah.
Almost at the same time.
Well, not necessarily at the same time, and we need to be very precise about what we mean by civilization. And what I mean is life is lived in a city. Now, this isn't just some cultural revolution, it's life is lived in a city. And one of the common features between all these places is the appearance of some kind of very stylized mound, as in a ziggurat or a pyramid. I mean, one of the places that I've not really included in my research, but it warrants more further, deeper research, is China. Because there are mysterious pyramid type structures in China. So it's more than possible that the culture did exist there as well in ancient times.
Wow, so certainly it seems that these were the same people.
It seems that they certainly were part of some kind of elite that had the ability to travel around the world. They were global travellers. They knew how to get about, and in particular, it would appear that they knew how to navigate. They knew how to use latitude and longitude to find their way around the world. They weren't afraid to use the seas. I mean, later, obviously the Phoenicians become the very well-known seafarers who traded on behalf of the Egyptians. But even before the Phoenicians became dominant, it's possible that the earliest members of this elite knew also how to get about. And after all, geometry means earth measurement. So if you're teaching geometry, you're teaching earth measurement.
Interesting. And it seems that these elite, these shaman priests, if you will, that were all over the world, also knew about how to change and mutate livestock, cereals. Can you comment on that?
Yes, well, there's the cereal thing actually falls into two halves, because I'm going by what happened in what we call the Golden Crescent, which is where we say the earliest signs of civilization occur, not cities as such, but the earliest signs, like the earliest metalwork, the earliest pottery, this kind of thing. And this is where we find the earliest examples of domestication of cereals. Around about 9,000 BC, over 11,000 years ago. And what makes the difference between a wild cereal and a domesticated cereal is a single gene. It's a gene to do with what makes the seed head non-brittle, because in the wild, the seed head is brittle, and as soon as it is ripe, it scatters on the wind. The domesticated variant waits to be picked. That's the difference. It's not to do with taste, it's to do with convenience. I have some theories as to why this occurred, particularly in those hilly foothills of these mountainous areas in the Golden Crescent, long before cities appeared. I think that the civilizers knew how to do this modification in order to create food stocks to feed possibly feed local people who were working on their behalf in extracting minerals and so forth from these mountainous areas. That's my theory. Something called the Halafian culture, which appears at around that time, 9,000 BC. And there are settlements, chains of settlements all the way up, in particular from Çatalhöyük going up to Mount Nimrod. So I think around northern Euphrates is where this earliest cereal is found. The domestication of animals, that occurs much later, and that coincides with the appearance of cities. And we've kind of convinced ourselves that it's some change in animals that allows the cities to appear, but I think it's the other way around. I think it's because of cities that these animals are domesticated, because there's a very important event horizon called the secondary products revolution, and what this means is it's the time when an auroch became a cow. You could take milk and use the secondary products, make the secondary products of butter and cheese. Horses became rideable, and sheep produced a coat that became wool, in effect, because before that, sheep had coats like deer. They weren't useful in the same way. So it's a really, really insignificant change that occurs. And it's so interesting that in the as it were, 9 pockets around the world where the earliest farming and the earliest cities, they both all arise at the same, they coincide, this early farming and these early cities, these pockets of change.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
In your experience, in your research, would you say that these happen naturally or organically, or was there some splicing of genes? Was there some plan in changing plant and animal to suit our needs?
I think it must have been deliberate, because for a start, it's very specific to these places where cities appear. Our rocks continued to exist even to the time of Julius Caesar. They didn't disappear. So this is not an evolutionary step. And this change also occurs very quickly. It occurs within a space of about 100 years or so, that can be identified, and which is not an evolutionary time frame. An evolutionary time frame will be much slower. So it's a very instant change. And so it's incredibly suspicious that it always appears for the right reasons. And the thing that nobody really comments on is that for me, one of the really significant changes in these animals is they become docile. They become handleable. Living as I do on a farm in rural east of England, I'm very appreciative of the fact that these animals become docile. I have had everything on the farm that can kill you, whether it's a bull, a boar, a big horse, a ram, whatever it is. And so to me, it's a very significant thing. It's not just the change in terms of shape and size. It's also the fact that you can work with these animals, which you can't so easily do with wild animals.
That is very, very interesting. It makes me think about Zechariah Sitchin's work.
Yeah, indeed. Well, yes, I think he might have a point there. There's also the work of, I don't know if you know it, of The Genius of the Few, which is the O'Brien work. That also interprets the cuneiform, identifying these possible areas that talk about maybe genetic modification. I think it's the only plausible explanation. I mean, to go back to the cereals point, there's a very splendid professor, very renowned, very much respected, called Professor Gordon Hillman, who is quite well known in the UK, who's done the work on the cereals, and he has calculated that this change from brittle to non-brittle would occur only in 1 to 2 million seed heads, and it would take 20 to 30 cycles to produce enough of a crop. And that's all fine, I have no argument with the quality of his work in that respect. But my point of argument would be that he claims that it's women who pick these non-brittle seed heads. He has no proof of that. He has no evidence of that. This is just an assumption on his part. Why would women single out something? They go, no, we're picking it all. After all, people like a group of people called the Natufians, because you can sow wild seeds. They have been cultivating wild seeds for 3,000 years without actually identifying non-brittle and brittle seed heads. So I don't buy that argument. It doesn't stack up for me. No. And this is really the nub of my research, in the sense that I take very established research from highly respected academic sources, but I give it a different interpretation.
Certainly, and that is so important. That's why your book is something that needs to be. I think it needs to be in the educational curriculum.
Well, I think it would probably rattle too many cages.
I think it was. But I think that's necessary. I mean, how else will change take place?
Well, I know.
Unless we open our minds.
Well, this is true. But then you put your finger on it tomorrow. You need an open mind in the first place. And this is the trouble with people who have sinecures and research grants. They don't like to have their foundations ruffled or challenged too much.
Certainly. Certainly, we've seen a lot of great careers destroyed.
Yes,
because someone started speaking out of the box.
Well, exactly. Unfortunately for me, because I'm an independent researcher, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not affiliated to any academic institution, and so I'm not vulnerable to that kind of attack.
You certainly are not, and that's why everyone listening should run out and get Approaching Chaos. To support your work. Very, very important work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. So I want to really speak to the general public who have an interest in this and help them just question things. Like, hang on a minute, that doesn't stack up. So if it didn't work like that, then how did it work? This is really what we need to be doing. So I hope to do a good job there.
Well, to speak about, parts of the society and in our culture, we go to religion.
Yeah.
The church has further compounded the loss of this knowledge and blinded people to even seek a lot of the information. I mean, I know firsthand, I study astrology quite a bit. And certainly the church has condemned astrology, but we know that the Bible is based on astrology.
Indeed.
Really looking into it, you can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a real blind spot. But the church basically, they couldn't cope with anything that questioned their own authority. And so and also if you go to somewhere like Chartres Cathedral in France, you'll find in the cathedral there, the blue stained windows have all the signs of the zodiac in it. So they're a little bit compromised in terms of what the official view on astrology has been. But they can't cope with forms of divination, because that basically undermines their direct access to the Almighty God and so forth. So they've had to move away from these things, but in a sense, what is going to really undermine a lot of these positions is when people fully take on board the implications of scientific progress of research into quantum physics. Once people realise that you can't be fully objective, and individuals do matter, and we all have these characteristics and astrology, people who've looked at natal charts and done research have shown that it does stack up. It does help to explain certain traits in people. People have their charts, so I find them very accurate in many cases.
Oh, most definitely, and even history. The things that happen, different climates, different movements can certainly be identified with astrology. It's really quite amazing.
That's very true. And after all, if we can be influenced by the moon in terms of gravity and in terms of waves and why is it not possible for other celestial bodies to also have an impact on us?
That's right. And since we are mostly water,
exactly,
the moon certainly does affect the tides, and so it does affect us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we know that if you lock people away in dark underground rooms, their biorhythms are affected. We're very connected into our planet and our universe. So I can't see why that needs to be ignored, really.
Yeah, we certainly can learn something by going back to the ancient beginnings.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's what we're going to talk about in our second half. We're going to go to ancient Khemet and take a look at what some of these shamanic beliefs and activities and the purposes were behind a lot of it, a lot of the hallucinogenic substances they use.
Mm-hmm.
And to just take a look at this idea of ma'at, of living much as you are. You are coexisting with nature, in your farm home and the way that you live. You are very careful about your carbon blueprint there.
Yes, and try to minimize our impact on in terms of pollution, and that's very true. Indeed, we have a very natural sewage system, for example, here, where because we don't use any horrible chemicals, everything can be absorbed by reeds and gravel, and it all goes back into the ground, and there is no toxic waste. That to me is the ultimate in terms of successful harmonious living. To live without chemical treatment and still be hygienic. Sanitation is a mark of being civilized.
Right. We don't have to have those toxic chemicals.
No.
Now, how about energy?
How about energy in terms of generating energy, do you mean?
Yeah.
Like power sources? Well, this is something, Tamara, that I have failed to really solve this problem so far, but I'm very, very open to it and very interested in and I have had a group of close friends who, between us, we've done what we can to study Tesla and various other far-seeing, very thoughtful people, because I do believe that there's more to these things than we're currently told, and I don't think we need to be as dependent on hydrocarbons as we are.
Right.
But I personally haven't managed to crack that one. I mean, I had installed at the farm a biofuel boiler that it burns oil from oilseed rape that we grow on the farm. I mean, we have done that. We're not currently using it at the moment, but I know the principle of it works. And then we also use the oil in the tractor, our little tractor. And so it's a very convenient multi-fuel kind of approach, because we can generate electricity in the generator and run the vehicles with it. But it's not really, it's only an interim solution. It's not really the answer.
Right.
I didn't have to buy a special tractor, and I could use an ordinary generator to do this with some minor modifications. So it was a very quick solution to the problem.
Right.
But there's definitely more we can explore in that respect.
Have you found solar and wind power beneficial for you?
I have personally steered clear, particularly of wind, because I don't live in a consistently windy area, and so I have decided not to pursue that particular option. There are some views that in the more distant past, because people relied on windmills to grind the corn, there were times of starvation when there was no wind.
Right.
So I kind of not pursued that one. And I do have some solar panels, but I'm again also a little bit reluctant to completely go down the solar panel route, partly because we need such rare earth to incorporate in the panels. I feel they're not an entirely environmentally friendly solution, because these rare earths have to be dug out from places which might not benefit so much from the mining of them. And also you need power all the year round. My greatest need for power is in the winter. So my personal jury is out on this subject. I'm still investigating it. I'm still making
Excellent. And you will. You're quite an investigator, and so you will discover the perfect setup for yourself. That's for sure. Well, we are coming to a close to our first part of the interview, and I thank everyone for listening.